I'll just say that I was actually shocked at one point to speak to one of my rebbeim from Keren Biavne, who lived a very simple life, and I really much looked up to him as someone who lived with pashtus with a lot of emunah and a lot of kedusha and a lot of Torah. And I asked him what does it cost to have a family? And he threw out a number for the amount of his kids, and he doesn't even pay rent because Keren Biavne has free rent for the rebbeim. And I was shocked. I was shocked at how much it was, and I have no idea honestly how he covers it. But I think it's important to have real conversations with people who are really doing it and ask them if what's sustainable and what's not. I spoke to a recruiter who came very highly recommended from people who I really trust. And I told her this cheshbon of maybe a role with this amount of hours and this amount of salary. And she actually laughed in my face, which was a bit of a humiliating experience, but I didn't take it too hard. And I kept my head up, and I ended up finding a role that not only had the hours that I was looking for to support my learning, but it also was 50% more than the salary that I had told her that I was going to try to make within that role. Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank. Stark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This is a special bonus episode. We're going to try something a little bit different. I'm joined now by Teddy Berman. Teddy is a listener who reached out and had a few questions for me, and we thought we would maybe just hit record and see how the conversation goes and share it with our listeners. So Teddy, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love the podcast, and a lot of akarsa tov to you. A lot of guidance, so really appreciate it.
Thank you. So you're sort of in the driver's seat. Tell me a little bit about how I can help you today.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little of my backstory. I grew up in Brooklyn, yeshiva Flatbush till 12th grade. I grew up in the Syrian community, and then I went to Brooklyn College. I didn't do a gap year. I wanted to go straight to work. So I did finance for 4 years at Brooklyn College, and then worked a bit as an analyst. And at a certain point, I got the bug and regretted not going after high school. So I took a year off, a gap year, went to Chappelle's, and it was an amazing experience. And what was supposed to be like a year of learning turned into almost 10 years. And thank God we're at a point, we had 2 kids, and looking to pivot back to the business world. So right now I'm working as a coach and a meshiv in the yeshiva in Mea Shearim with Barry Klein's Chabura. And I've been loving it, and I'm trying just to integrate the different parts of my story, my journey.
Amazing. So first of all, it's awesome to hear from you, and it's awesome to hear that you are steiging away and found the fire of learning, and it's really special to hear. And I also think you just mentioned a really important word, the word integrating, which is something that we talk about a lot, and I hear a lot from listeners. So tell me a little bit about what you're sort of thinking about, what your options are going forward over the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. And have you started to inquire about various paths forward or considered specific roles or positions that you think might be good for you in your next stage? Mm-hmm. And these American hour roles, it's obviously a great idea to try and learn as much as possible and work on the side. What types of roles do you see available or you've interviewed for or been looking at? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really, really important that dreams not be given up on too quickly. There's also what to be said for not holding on to them past their expiration date. But I certainly think as a first stage, as a first effort, I think it's really important to really shoot for the stars as much as you think is practically possible, and you have a head on your shoulders. I think you realize that there are always practical limitations on any human endeavor. But having dreams is important. Having aspirations is important. Having ambition is important. And personally, I've shared this once or twice on the podcast before, but I think it's worth repeating. Is that when I left Kollel, I did a certain cheshbon that I could do a certain amount of hours and make a certain amount of money, and it would be good, and it would leave me a certain amount of hours for my learning. The specifics are less important right now. And I spoke to a recruiter who came very highly recommended from people who I really trust. And I told her this cheshbon of maybe a role with this amount of hours and this amount of salary. And she actually laughed in my face, which was a bit of a humiliating experience, but I didn't take it too hard, and I kept my head up, and I ended up finding a role that not only had the hours that I was looking for to support my learning, but it also was 50% more than the salary that I had told her that I was going to try to make within that role. And Baruch Hashem, it's been a big bracha, and I've actually gotten a raise since then, which has also been nice. So I think number one is that dreams are not to be discarded, and sometimes people around you are a little, can be cynical. Like, are you really going to do it? So you can say, I don't know. No one knows it's going to work. I don't know what's going to work for you. But I think holding on to dreams is very, very important. I think the other thing to say is that within the transition to working, the dream of the morning seder is a tantalizing dream. And again, not one that should be given up on, but I think it can also sometimes distract from some other very important considerations. So I think, meaning, in the end of the day, let's just give a bit of an extreme example. If you were to find a job that would give you a ton of money and American hours so that you could learn your full morning seder until 2 or 3 p.m., you'd be completely miserable with the actual work itself. Would you take that job or no? Right. So that's like a bit of an extreme example, but I think it illustrates a certain point, which is that the learning is very important, and it's the ikar of asay keva or kva, depending on how you read it, is certainly a primary concern. But we have to be a little careful here. And I remember even as a bacher, Shana Aleph, Shana Bet, speaking to a certain Gadol B'Yisrael. So I remember I spoke to Rav Yonasan Sachs when I was in Shana Aleph or Shana Bet. He came to KBY, and I was speaking about some of my career deliberations, and he said the most important thing is to find a job that you're going to enjoy doing. And I honestly remember at the time being so confused and so puzzled about why he would say that. In hindsight, what I think it might have had to do with is the fact that, if you're in Shana Aleph and you learn Mesilas Yesharim and you learn the first few chapters, the Mesilas Yesharim is very clearly that you should really be focused on your learning and maximizing for your learning. And your parnasa is just some sort of necessary evil to fill up the bank account and really create time and space for your learning. So that was, I think, maybe my mentality, which is why I found his words so puzzling. But why is he right? I think he's right. He's right because for a few reasons. Number one, there's another Mishnah, right? That Mesilas Yesharim is based on the Mishnah of having mimayit basic basuk b'Torah. But there's actually another Mishnah, a Mishnah which says ahovas hamalacha. You're supposed to love what you do. I think also different generations have different approaches to work, and it's not a shame to say that maybe where in Europe it was a poverty-stricken country and people were just potato farmers because it would get them a few cents to be able to buy some bread. We live in a different generation, and I think also it's a bracha to be able to work that has meaning and work that connects to your self-esteem. That's number two, and I think number three. Or maybe just one other point to add to that is the fact that, you have to be careful because there is a lot of shallow talk in the world about being passionate about your work and finding your calling. And I don't necessarily think that the Torah ascribes to all of that. And I don't think you're supposed to necessarily think about work as a vacation that you're supposed to, enjoy as much as you're learning or as much as your time with your family. But there's a balance here and a nuance which says finding work that you are enjoying and that you're good at and that you're connected to is important. Is important because of your mental health, as you alluded to. It's important because maybe Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you kochos, he wants you to use them. And the fact that you need parnasa is also another nudge from Kadosh Baruch Hu to go in a certain direction. So I think all these things, we have to be careful that when we're talking about a transition from learning to working, that we not allow the Torah to cloud out that decision. So I think there's a balance here that has to be struck between these two values.
Beautiful. Wow. I love what you're saying. In terms of like the Pirkei Avos part, like there's a lot of conflicting Musar shmoozes where like, yeah, like you said, Aser Torah Keva, and then there's like a famous one, my Rosh Yeshiva and ZA, which Shai Cohen always used to say, like, if you're makabel Torah, mavin level malchus ol derech. So like I've almost seen like Ma'ala Teva money come in, even though I don't have a job. Like somehow God has ways to send money, whether it's being in Eretz Yisrael or support for my family. Like at the right time, I always got money. So how critical is the job part, or is that just like basic ishtadlus and God like harbe shluchim lamakom? Like how do you reconcile some of those pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big question. I have always been a big believer in ishtadlus. Maybe my emunah is not big enough, and it's obviously it's a challenging question. It's a lot of gray areas, but I think the Ramban says very clearly when it talks about going to war. He says that Kadosh Baruch Hu commands us to go b'derech haaretz, and already in the Gemara it says harbe asu ke Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai v'lo alu biyadam. That meaning, as for the masses, for most people, for most of the time, the derech of Rabbi Yishmael of Haneg Ben Min Derech Eretz is the right way to go. Yeah, I think also the transition that you're now making as your family in Kananahar grows is also part of that. I'm sure whatever it is that your expenses look like today, it's dome to what's going to Bezrat Hashem look like in a few years as your family continues to grow. So I think it's important to realize that. And I think you should also speak to people who are a little bit down the line from you. Obviously you see your experience from the last couple of years, but if you have people who have gone through somewhat of a similar path and are a few years in the future, I think that'd be very helpful and very valuable. I'll just say that I was actually shocked at one point to speak to one of my rebbeim from Kerem Biavne, who lived a very simple life, and I really much looked up to him as someone who lived in Pashtus with a lot of emunah and a lot of kedusha and a lot of Torah. And I think I was getting married, and he was, we were talking very tachlis, and I asked him like what does it cost to have a family? And he threw out a number for the amount of his kids, and he doesn't even pay rent because Kerem Biavne has free rent for the rebbeim, and I was shocked. I was shocked at how much it was, and I have no idea honestly how he covers it. But I think it's important to have real conversations with people who are really doing it and ask them if if it's if what's sustainable and what's not.
Amazing. Thank you. Another thing, I'm more in like the Sephardi Syrian world. So there is like two tracks of like people who are mashpia. There's like the rabbi by the bima, like Rabbi Joey Haber, he's spreading Torah all over. And then there's like the Charlie Harari track. So I'm wondering if that should be a factor in like, should I be considering, will I get more credibility to the target market if I am a working person? Maybe it enhances the Torah. Like, is that a healthy Torah shkafa?
So I think you're touching on a very important point, and I would repackage it a little bit differently, which is that wherever you go, you will have opportunities to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You will have opportunities to learn Torah and to teach Torah and to inspire other people. What exactly that looks like? So then I think there, the route to take should be going back to the practical discussions before. I'm a pretty practical person. So what are the parnasa needs? What's going to work for you, for your wife, for your family, for your community? And start with that, with the knowledge that wherever you go, you will, as you alluded to, you will find opportunities. Kadosh Baruch will give you opportunities. You will find for yourself opportunities to learn Torah, to teach Torah, to inspire others. So it's not like, as you know, spoke before, like alechatchila and a b'diavad, like you need to do you need to find the right path for yourself, and with the complete knowledge that you're going to serve Kadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to be a shliach for him and for Klal Yisrael wherever you go. And therefore, I think there's a way of thinking about it where there's no like actual chachil and b'diavad. There's only what's good for you, what's your tafkid at this stage, at this point in life. And I think that, you're talking about like the careers, I think it's very important that people really look inside themselves. Right? Oftentimes people are looking to the podcast world, to Shark Tank, or they're looking to people on LinkedIn or online to find eitzah, to find guidance. And there's place for that, obviously. But I think it's really important that the most important book that you read is the book of yourself, right? Is that Sefer Toldot HaAdam? And there's actually a tool which I've suggested to a few people and gotten some very good feedback, which is that, I think AI is a really great way to do this. I think the prompt has to be something like, give me a little bit about your background and maybe some of the industries or jobs you would consider looking at. But then the real prompt is to ask AI to ask you self-reflection questions, to just shine a mirror on yourself, to think about your own values in a deep way, in a profound way. And that way, your decisions will be made primarily based on who you are, what your potential is, what your value systems are. And that way, I think that we talk about finding a job where you're fulfilled and you're happy. It's really comes down to knowing yourself and being true to yourself and not being true to other things in the outside world. I think that's the number one. I mean, hard to say, but I think a very important key factor to success that I've seen amongst the hundreds of people who I've spoken to about this topic is people who know themselves, who are true to themselves, who aren't distracted by what the outside world views as success metrics. I think that's the real key to success in whatever it is that you're going to do next.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I appreciate you told me about the AI, and I've been using Claude as like a chavrusa, like you're saying, to see my strengths and see my different parts and the integration, like we spoke about, like trying to find how I could channel that into a job. So that was a game changer. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And I would just maybe add one more thing to keep in mind in this exercise, which is the fact that, a lot of the skills that you have mentioned to me and others, you're not the only one, are, this is debatable, but my intuition is that, when you talk about coaching and working with guys and working with people and having good social skills is, in general, it's more of a soft skill.
Mm,
And in business, if you want to apply, you have to ask yourself, why is someone going to pay me a lot of money to be on their team, on their payroll as a consultant of theirs? And there has to be, some value that you're adding to them in a business sense. So I think oftentimes the people skills are a very important soft skill that will certainly boost and multiply whatever it is that you're going to do. But I think also having that in mind, that you're asking to draw out parts of you that are marketable, that are applicable to whatever industry you might, or just help find the industry, all those things. I think it's important to distinguish, because as great it is that you're working with guys and you have good people skills. So that's super important. I can't overestimate that's important, but I'm not sure how many people want to hire someone and pay them a lot of money because they're like a good schmoozer or they're a good coach. Like there's a little bit of that, but I think it's a lot harder versus finding some more marketable skill that will be of value. You could provide value to a business and then use the people skills to really boost that.
beautiful. Yeah, I love that shit between the soft and the hard skills. You're bringing out a great point. 100%.
You were also talking about your move to Israel. I want you to tell a little more about that and sort of how you view your integration, your Aliyah, your transition to Israeli society, because I know something that a lot of guys, who make Aliyah after growing up in America struggle with. So I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about that.
Sure. Yeah, so we come from a very tight knit Syrian community. So we are one of the one of like the pioneers. A few young families made Aliyah at the same time, and it's been like a core group in Jerusalem trying to like recreate a community here. We come more from like the modern Orthodox world, and then I pivoted a little to the right, and now I'm coming back, I guess, to the center. So we're trying to find the community in Eretz Yisrael, and it's a little different because a lot of American communities are built around like the Shabbos, the Kiddush, and in Israel, you don't really hang out as much in shul, and it's more, I guess, my yeshiva right now is my community. So we're trying to find that like people at similar stages with young kids and have similar values. So that's definitely something we're on the search for actively now, still in the middle of it. So we're exploring different options, both in, I guess, the Tilomi or the Haredi Mamlech, like a few different communities where we could find that balance.
I think there's one word that you mentioned that I would harshly disagree with. You said it's a little bit different. I don't think it's a little bit different. I
Very.
think it's a lot of bit different, and it's a huge challenge when I speak to again listeners or friends in this transition at this stage, growing up in America or in Chutz La'aretz and making Aliyah as a young adult. It's a really big challenge. I think you should first of all just give yourself a pat on the back for facing it head on and coming to Israel and really giving it your all. I think also saying which you said, which I think is very true, and I want to just to point out, which is the fact that, I think it's a big mistake for people to expect to make Aliyah and not have drastic changes.
Mm.
It's a new country. It's a new society. There are some similarities and there are some comforts of home and there are some people who are, maybe in between and Anglos and Israelis. But I think just the baseline assumption that Aliyah should entail for everybody is that it's a big, big, big transition. So you mentioned, thinking about different communities maybe a little bit different or transition. I think that's important to realize that, for some people, their approach is like, I really want to fit into the mold or the tracks that I was familiar with growing up. And I certainly understand that. And then, they're frustrated because they can't find a community that really tracks on that path. I think, thinking about it in terms of this is a big transition and we're gonna, and it's going to be a challenge, but we're going to find a place that we align with to a good degree, our core hashkafa, our core values, but then there's going to be a lot of changes in addition to that. I think that's a very, very healthy approach. The other approach, which you kind of alluded to, and it's a much more risky one, I'll be very honest, but it's not impossible. And talk about, not giving up on dreams, is the people who come and say, well, let's build a community, let's build a yeshuv, let's build a new neighborhood or a new project and bring all of our friends. So that's a very ambitious dream. I will just say that, people who I know who have tried it have had very, there are many layers of difficulty to such an endeavor. So, for people who are, more risk averse, if your wife is more risk averse, or there's so many variables, you find a building project and you're going to get a bunch of families, but then there's no shul, or then the shul becomes a different nusach, or more families move in and the municipal, there are so many layers. We can go back to some of the episodes we did with people who have been involved in sort of starting new communities. It's a really, really, really complicated question. So I think those are just two tracks to think about it. And I think the baseline is that there's going to be big challenges within such a drastic change. But I think that those are sort of two paths, one a lot, both with their challenges. I think you just have to choose what you think makes most sense for you.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely a real adjustment like you're bringing out, whether it's not having family or not being in like a tight knit community. Like we had to be, like the Syrian identity is very unique, and coming to Eretz Yisrael, I guess we had to zoom out and be more a part of the cloud, being more part of like Am Yisrael, and not necessarily hold on to that to as much of our culture that we like grew up in. It was an integral part of us. So definitely an adjustment, big time.
Yeah, I don't know if this is somewhat comforting to you, but I was just yesterday meeting with a good friend and a listener and someone hopefully be on the podcast soon, someone who made Aliyah from the UK. And he was talking about how challenging it is for him because, their shul, it's a challenge whether they're going to have the Yigdal that he grew up with so many years in London and such a beautiful nusach, or this type of nusach for different Yamim Tovim, Yamim Noraim. And now he comes to Israel. And so, okay, so he has a few British families in his community and maybe they do have a British minyan sometimes, or their request for nusach is honored sometimes, but it's a big, big challenge for many people who come to Eretz Yisrael. I think it's one of the challenges of kibbutz galios, where people are coming from so many different places. And I think one of the ways that it's interesting to think about, which is the fact that, even if, let's say you could gather 10 of your friends and have a nice Syrian minyan with the Syrian nusach. Okay. And it's really geschmack for you to have your kids, Bezrat Hashem, come to you in shul and have the same nusach that you grew up with in Brooklyn, and they're going to get it in somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. Beautiful, special, very nice. What are the chances, what are the percentages that they're going to have that nusach in the yeshiva they go to when they're 18, or the girl that they marry?
Yeah.
That's like a low percentage. So it's a challenge. It's a struggle here because if you think, it's already true that many of the yeshivas now have mixed stuff. They have a little bit of Ashkenazi, a little bit of Sephardi, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Each one negotiating in their own way, but it's fascinating to think about. On the one hand, the Besorah is so special and so precious, and we love to give our children what we got as kids. On the other hand, we're in a very different country, as I said. It's a very big transition, and navigating that challenge is something that we all have to deal with.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. And also choosing a box and community like we were speaking about before, I guess for chinuch and for our kids, how critical do you think that is to maybe we're gonna have to sacrifice on a few things that we grew up with, but choose a system that is best for our children and our future? Like, how would you recommend going about doing the chinuch part of having to choose a box?
Yeah, so it's a good question. A lot of Olim talk about that, and I've heard it from many wonderful people, family members, friends who have made Aliyah, and have said we're choosing a box. I don't like the word box. I really don't. I think that for me personally, my wife and I, we chose a community. We really wanted to first find a place to live with neighbors and friends who we felt really aligned with our values, and we understood that with that decision, came a very limited option of schools and a certain type of shul and some other sort of intangibles or decisions that sort of came from that. If you want to call the sum of those different pieces of box, you could. It's a word. If you want to use it, if it's helpful for you, great. I just don't think about it that way. It's, we chose a kila where people take Torah seriously, where we feel like we can align with their values on a number of core issues. And yeah, that creates some wonderful opportunities, that creates certain challenges. And I think, calling it a box is a bit, it's bothersome on a few levels. I would just say, I think the most important thing is like intellectually, like I still view myself as a thinking person, and I have my opinions, and I agree with some things that my neighbors say, and I disagree with some things that my neighbors say, and I will educate my children based on what I view as, the truth. Obviously, it's not healthy if you have, major clashes every day between what you're telling your kid and his Rebbe is telling the kid. That's not a healthy dynamic. I think overall, the community is one of which we align with. And I still believe in what I believe in, and I will continue to try my best to believe in those things, understand those things, learn those things, talk about those things, educate my children in that under that ashkafa. So yes, I don't like the whole box discourse, but for some people, I guess it's helpful.
Fair enough. I guess in America, we're used to more of maybe like a spectrum of options. And in Eretz Yisrael, it felt a little more black and white, like you had to choose or either you're Datilomi or you're Haredi. And to find that like integrated community, like my wife's more in like the YU world, I happen to teach more in the Haredi world. So we would love to find a community that has aspects of both. It's just we're finding like we had to choose. But like you're saying, it's not necessarily a box. It's just it's a package of ideals and trying to get as close as possible to our values. So definitely some trade offs.
I also just want to say that I think the dynamic that you just described I think is very understandable, but I think it's really a function of just the familiarity that you have with the American world and your lack of familiarity with the Israeli world.
Mm,
Because once you actually are looking at it from the inside, there's a lot of diversity within the Dati Leumi world. There's a lot of diversity within the Haredi world. There are that's just a fact of life. So, from the outside, you're familiar with the ins and outs of the American world. You're familiar with the different flavors, the different strands, different schools, different communities, difference between whatever you fill in the blank. When you come to Israel, you actually get to know the people, get to know the communities. You realize that there's a lot of difference between various yeshuvim and various cities and various communities and various yeshivas, various rabbanim. That's even just the Tilumi world, which I'm most familiar with. And also in the Haredi world, there's a lot of different, as much as there's a projection of uniformity, and there's a lot of uniformity in the Haredi world. But I think it's sometimes overblown, and if you actually see it from the inside, there's a lot of nuance there as well. So I think that the dynamic that you're describing is actually a function of just your lack of knowledge, which is not your fault.
right.
But I think there's actually, once you're actually on the inside, there's actually a lot more nuance, there's a lot more tracks, a lot more diversity than you're actually giving it credit for.
Fair enough. Yeah. We made Aliyah 3 years ago, so we're still learning the ropes. And as our kids get older, we'll hopefully pick up on more of those nuances and subtleties that you're alluding to be more sensitive to that.
All right, Teddy, thank you so much for calling. I appreciate this conversation, and looking forward to being in touch. And I can't wait to hear what Akash Baruch Hu has in mind for you next.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Plus, appreciate it.